Radical Secular, a video series dedicated to the separation of church and state and the pursuit of justice.
Hello, and welcome back to the Radical Secular. I'm Sean Prophet.
I'm Christophe Difo.
This is our 13th episode. Ooh, it is scary, let me tell you. And I don't even really want to joke about that because we have to talk about Ruth Bader Ginsburg and what happens now. We're going to talk about her life, her accomplishments, the implications of her death, and how the Dems should fight back against the vacancy of this historic Supreme Court seat being filled by a Republican under the Trump administration. This is heavy, folks, not going to lie. And our next topic after that will be the wildfires and climate change and the fossil fuel mafia. And we have a new post up about that on the Just Words fallacy. And then finally, we'll talk about how all this is connected and what we can all do about it. But before we get into that, I want to first remind you to make sure to subscribe to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're watching this on YouTube, be sure to hit the red subscribe button. That's really important. And if on the podcast, give us a 5-star rating. We'll take it. If you're listening, we hope you like the show well enough to give us that kind of rating. And it really matters in terms of our distribution. Also, tell your friends and family. We get that word of mouth out there. A recommendation is worth its weight in gold. And so, you'll be helping us reach more people. And so we really appreciate that. Also, we'd like to announce that we are now available on Amazon. So hopefully you should be able to just say to Alexa, play the Radical Secular podcast. Hope it works. Haven't tried it yet, but we'll be looking forward to that. And next, I want to plug our Just Words Fallacy Medium publication. Just Words Fallacy posts weekly articles from progressive and diverse authors related to politics, religion, rationality, and justice. Just Words Fallacy is the narrative companion to the Radical Secular podcast. Our link is in the show notes. And if you're interested in publishing your work on Just Words Fallacy publication, here is our contact info.
Email us at theradicalsecular@gmail.com. Follow us on Instagram at @radical_secular. Follow us on Twitter at Radical Secular. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, podcasts at Apple, Google, Spotify, and Stitcher.
Now, let's get into the t-shirts. Christophe, what do you got on your shirt today?
All right. First of all, thanks for nailing that intro, Sean. Nailing it. Sean and I, we work together on this show all week long, and we bat ideas back and forth and trying to figure this out. And we are building this airplane as we fly it, as we like to say. And so our intro is always a work in progress. And I just like to give Sean a big thumbs up for nailing it.
Thank you. Thank you.
And now my shirt. My shirt is this shirt is from Pod Save America. It is the Pod Save America emblem. So, and the reason why I'm wearing this shirt is twofold. First of all, because back when, right after the election, so Pod Save America came online right after the 2016 election. And I remember my good friend, Stephanie Roth, who, by the way, Stephanie Roth Goldberg, who is going to be a guest on this show at some point. Shout out to Stephanie. She gave me, we were on a skiing trip up in Vermont in February. So like it's February 17. And we were all beside ourselves, right? I mean, this was right after the inauguration. It was fresh. It was painful. Every day waking up felt like a nightmare, right? And we were on the lift and she said, "Oh, you got to check out this podcast." I was like, "Oh, okay, whatever. I'll check it out." And so we listened to it the entire ride home, like from beginning to end. And it became this light, this beacon in the absolute darkness. Like, because these guys were right out of the Obama White House. First of all, the first episode.
These guys are great. They're
great. I mean, they're just great. Their first episode is Obama, right? Literally Obama, right? So these guys are right out of the White House, and they know politics. And they were telling us, like, yeah, it's bad, but here are the cards we can play. Here is what we can do. Here is why we should have hope. And that was something I really needed. And I think that was something I needed this morning because
we need it now.
We need it now. We need it now. We need that hope now. And the second thing is Pod Save America is I like to think of us here on the Radical Secular as like a cooler, less white, and more hardcore version of Pod Save America. It's like, we're not doing the same thing here, but we are talking about politics. We're talking
love to be able
stuff.
to fill their shoes. Let's just say that,
Exactly. Let's do that. Let's say that. So we would love to be able to step in and sort of and be part of that movement. So anyway, that's my shirt today, and everybody so everybody can see it. I'll just step away from the microphone for a second.
Awesome.
Yes, and if you're watching, if you're listening, it's basically not Abraham Lincoln. I'm sorry, George Washington with AirPods in his ears, and so that's sort of the image with Pod Save America across the top. So shout out to Pod Save America, and shout out to us becoming Pod Save America one day.
One day. All right. Well, my shirt, obviously, it's pretty on the nose. I was waiting for a time to wear Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and I had no concept in my wildest imaginings, between now and the election, that I would be wearing it for her death. So here we are. And of course, it says "I dissent," and it has her with one of her famous collars, which are very symbolic for anyone who doesn't know about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She wears a different collar depending on whether she is going to dissent or whether it's a concurrence or whatever other type of decision that it is. So anyway, we have to get right into talking about her, because this came up on my newsfeed last night. My son was driving when it happened. He almost had an accident. I was on the phone with Christophe. We were discussing today's show, and Christophe's wife, Lindsay, came in, and I heard her in the background. I could tell something was going on that was not good. And then I pulled up CNN, and it was this. So
yeah. It was really incredible because Sean called me last night. We were talking about the show and what we were going to talk about today, and we, like I said earlier, we had this. The theme of the show today was going to be related to the article that we posted on Just Words Fallacy this past week. So this past week, the way the Just Words Fallacy works is that we have guest authors, right? And then 1 week and the following week, we have basically like standard content from Just Words Fallacy, which is basically a fusion of what Sean, oftentimes a fusion between Sean and me, right? And it's basically a collaboration. The last piece was specifically, in particular, a collaboration in that way.
And you knocked it out of the park, by the way.
Well, thank you. And the bones were good, Sean. The bones were good. And that's the key with that kind of stuff. And we have a great time doing that kind of stuff. And of course, the topic of climate change is so critical, and we're going to talk about this later, and so important. And so we were all really gung ho about talking about this week, and talking. This was
going to be a climate episode.
This was going to be our climate episode. This is what we were going to talk about, and it was going to be all about America's longest war, and that's not Afghanistan. In fact, it's a climate change war that we've been fighting.
Yeah.
But of course this happened, and we're talking on the phone, and my wife yells, and she knows, by the way, that I was talking on the phone with you, because I went downstairs, Sean, and I put my earbuds in, and I was like, "Oh, do you mind if I talk while I'm doing X, Y, and Z down?" And she's like, No. She was working. That's fine. So she knew I was on the phone with you. She wouldn't just come barging in into the conversation for no reason.
No, well,
but she screamed from downstairs.
On that occasion, this is like the Challenger exploding, or Trump getting elected, or 9/11. I mean, it's that level of news story. So at that point, I would hope anybody would bust in. And the crazy part is, I want to really look at this CNN front page so people can understand how serious this all is. I mean, this is out of the fucking Twilight Zone, I have to say. I mean, just here's a sample of some of the things that happened on the same day. Emails show top HHS official and Trump ally are intimidating a CDC official. I mean, during a pandemic, there's like intrigue in our government to lie to the American people. Okay, that's what's going on. White House tries to play defense with falsehoods about former Pence aide Troy. I'm not totally up on that story, but I think it has to do with the fact that a former aide to Vice President Pence is now voting for Biden. And
Correct.
So there's a whole firestorm with that going on. The next thing is that Trump says all Americans can get a vaccine by April, but health experts say that's not likely. So you have the president contradicting his own health experts. 3 arrested and accused of setting up illegal roadblocks near wildfire evacuation zones. Okay, it's like dystopia on steroids. Okay, we got a national disaster going on. We got yahoos out there setting up roadblocks to try to catch non-existent fucking, left-wing Antifa terrorists, and you got people like Joe Rogan promoting this horse shit. He should not be a podcast host. Okay. There is there are journalism schools for a reason. And this whole situation, this is a war between people who actually think it's, important to go to journalism school and people like Glenn fucking Beck, who said that anybody who went to journalism school is an enemy of humanity. I'm like, what is going on here? It's literally the world is falling apart. And I'm not done. I'm not done with this here. Okay.
What about Bill Barr, right?
Well, we'll get to him.
Okay, we'll get to Bill Barr.
This one is Milwaukee students attending online class heard fatal shots and their teacher called 911. Dystopia, okay? Stunning. Dr. Gupta on report White House stopped USPS from mailing masks. Now, this is a real scandal, okay? The U.S. Postal Service was ready to mail like 5 masks to every household in the United States. They were ready to go. They had like 600 million masks ready to go. Trump administration stopped it from happening, okay? That's mass murder. That is mass fucking murder, folks. There's no two ways about it. All right. Carjacker held a couple hostage for hours and then killed the husband, investigators say. This is all just like news items from the same day.
Right? Normal day.
U.S. sending armored vehicles into Syria as Trump says we are out. Okay, so contradicting his own military, once again, lying about what our military is doing. Constitution doesn't require census to be accurate, Trump administration says. So we're going to have a fake census count. And Trump says that's okay with the Constitution. All right. And I'm not done yet.
Unreal.
U.S. will try to reimpose sanctions on Iran. Okay. So this is part of this whole thing. We had a deal. We had a nuclear deal with Iran. President Obama negotiated a good deal, and Trump has just ruined it and brought us into the brink of conflict with Iran, which, by the way, this week said that it was going to take personal revenge on everybody involved with the killing of General Soleimani. All right. So this is just like a shit list of dystopia here on this one page. This is just one day of this administration.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So, and that's it. I'm done. I just don't.
And it's madness. And you add on top of that, during the Trump era, there is just sort of a background noise always, right? Like these sort of things are just constantly going on in the background, almost such that we unfortunately become desensitized to them. I mean, I think that as Americans, we tend to be desensitized in general to what's going on in the world because it doesn't affect us personally and directly. But here we are these are our countrymen who are, say, being shot. These are people who are dying unnecessarily from the pandemic because the administration decided that it was worth that the politics of the situation was more important than people's actual lives. We could go on and on. And this is not even talking about. Oh, remember the hysterectomy story? I mean, at a normal week,
add it to the list.
On a normal week, that would have been the story of the year, right? That would have been of the year, Sean. That would have been huge. And here we are. You forgot to even mention it because it's so subsumed by all this other stuff.
It had fallen off the front page by the time we got to today.
That's madness. That is madness, right? And so I think it's really important that we remember that none of this is normal and that this is this sort of disorder is complete. It is just not what we're used to. In some way, sick way, I'm almost grateful for it. I'm not really grateful for it, it's forcing people who are the bane of my existence. And those are the people who just don't pay attention to politics, bury their head in the sand, and just go about their lives. And there's still people that are still trying to do that, right? They still are not paying attention, but more and more, it becomes more and more difficult to ignore things that are happening. When your house is burning down, right? It's hard to ignore. When the temperature is 118 degrees, it's hard to ignore. These things are becoming salient issues for real people, and not to mention, of course, the pandemic.
Well, it's a race between whether or not people are going to figure out what the fuck is going on fast enough to get involved and to make a difference. And that's where we're actually in a race against time right now. And that's why that's why this show is being called Gilead with a question mark, because we are headed toward Gilead but we don't know. There's still that question mark right there. There's the unknown of what we are going to do about it, what we can do, what we are still capable of doing. It's like Garry Kasparov just said this week. His point is when you're dealing with a party that is only interested in power, and you're a party that's interested in the rule of law, he says you better take action because it only gets harder.
Right. Exactly. And we've seen this already, right? I mean, the Republicans have made it very clear that they are interested exclusively in power, in accumulating power and defending power, at least as far back as the 1964 Civil Rights Act, because that was the time when the fundamental structure of how the American hierarchy is laid out began to shift. So women decided, of course, people of color demanded rights. Women demanded rights all through the 70s and the women's movement. Gay people started demanding rights. And as soon as these things started happening, that is when the backlash became extremely more and more serious. And so right now, if we had the political will to nip this in the bud, even before the Clinton administration, right? The Clinton administration, when things really started ramping up during the Clinton administration, the bat shittery out of the right,
Newt Gingrich,
right? That changed everything. Again, changed everything. So my point is, and this is just speaking to your point, Sean, is that the faster, if we had gotten this done earlier, it would have been easier. But that doesn't matter because here we are now. So the question is, what do we do now? And we should,
well, let's tick off the milestones. Okay, so we got, we had the women's suffrage, and so that's the first shot across the bow of the white male supremacy of the nation. And so women's suffrage, and then we had the Civil Rights Act, and then we had the right to abortion being upheld in 1973.
Huge.
So Civil Rights Act 1964, abortion 1973, and gradually there's been more things ramping up. I mean, 2015, gay marriage. There's a lot of other things that happened in between there. The Fair Housing Act, the Voting Rights Act, all these other things like that. So then we started having the backlash. They have hated Roe v. Wade. They've hated the Civil Rights Act ever since then. They've never stopped trying to change it and put it back in the bottle. And right now we are actually getting to the moment where they're getting to the end game of that project. Because they've already succeeded in doing a couple of things, like the rolling back the Voting Rights Act, and then of course getting rid of the limitations on campaign finance with Citizens United and FEC versus McCutcheon and these other decisions that allowed almost unlimited contributions, and then dark money, and then now I guess the Helms Act that doesn't allow religious organizations to participate in politics, that isn't being enforced. It's just there's on and on and on, all these ways in which the Republicans have made it easier to challenge civil rights and made it harder to protect civil rights in all ways. And so that balance has been shifting on the court as well. And right now we have a situation where Mitch McConnell, the reason why we have the balance on the court the way it is today is because Mitch McConnell refused to let President Obama have his Supreme Court appointment in 2016. And that was the appointment of Merrick Garland, who basically they just refused. They said, nope, sorry, it's 11 months till the election. You're not getting it. And it was kind of an unprecedented obstruction. I don't know if any other president had ever been denied a Supreme Court appointment. Do you know if that?
I'm actually not sure either, but I do. I know Mitch McConnell claimed at the time that there was precedent for that. I think there's nothing more offensive, frankly, than Mitch McConnell coming out and saying, Ginsburg was an amazing justice and a pioneer, and she. By the way, he never mention feminist or feminism in that entire statement. I read the entire statement because he didn't acknowledge what Ruth Bader Ginsburg spent her career fighting for, which is for women's rights and for women's issues and for civil rights, and what she stood for on that court. There is a litany, Sean, of, first of all, clearly dissents. Some of her dissents, because she spent so much time in the minority during her tenure, right? She wrote a lot of dissents. But beyond that, where she's the second woman to ever be elected to ever be appointed to the court. She wrote countless opinions. She has, and I think this is frequently overlooked. And I have a particular affiliation or connection or sense of connection to Ginsburg. First of all, because I'm a progressive, and she is the sort of the progressive powerhouse. She was a progressive powerhouse, intellectual powerhouse on the court for so long, and such a pioneer in that way. But beyond that, I went to Georgetown Law, and we were just not far from the Supreme Court at all. And she was a friend of Georgetown, so she would come on campus from time to time, and so she would walk around the campus. Her husband taught tax law.
Oh, wow.
Marty Ginsburg. He taught.
Didn't know that.
He taught tax law over at Georgetown. I never took tax because I hate numbers. But he would open the semester by saying, "I don't know if you know this about me, but my wife's kind of a big deal," and that was like the big joke, right? But she really was sort of this tiny woman with this gigantic personality and such a presence. She would stand there with her two Secret Service people, and she would sit there just tiny and hunched over, but just really just so much life and energy. And so it makes this, I think, this entire thing so tragic. I mean, another interesting story about I had a thing that I was going to read about her, but you guys can go read her. I'll read about her online.
Let's put it in the show notes.
I put it in the show notes, but I did want to say this little thing, and that is, she went to Columbia Law School and also to Harvard Law School, but she, during one of the years of that she was, that they were there, there with her husband. Her husband was sick and couldn't go to classes, so she not only went to her classes, she went to his classes also and took notes for him, right? This is the woman that she was. This is the person that she was. And when she left school, she couldn't get a job at a big law firm or a law firm because they wouldn't hire women, right? This is the world that she went into. And
she changed the world. I think
the world
there's no question that she is one of the greatest Americans who has ever lived.
Absolutely. She's up there with Harriet Tubman and these powerful people that changed the course of American history. And I can only imagine being a woman. Like, I mean, I know when I see Barack Obama as a person of color, right? Barack Obama, we all agree, at least anyone who's listening to this show very much likely agrees that Barack Obama is an amazing man and was a really, really amazing president, despite things that we could disagree with him on.
Right.
But it's particularly as a person of color, I see Obama and I see hope. Right. I see, which is funny, right? He said hope all the time, but I see progress. I see hope. I always used to say that one of the biggest contributions that Obama made was that every public school in America, when a kid goes in there, they see that President Barack Obama is president and there's a black man as president. That little thing matters so much. And so my point is, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Sandra Day O'Connor before her. These women were pioneers and so critical. And I can imagine if I were a woman, that I would be, particularly saddened today.
It's astonishing. And I know that there's a lot of tears. A lot of women who I know are very, very sad about this. And it's not, and one very important point that was made is that women would love to be able to mourn and honor Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Instead, what are they feeling? Fear.
Yep.
Fear that their rights are going to be taken away from them, that now the genie's out of the bottle, the thread is broken, whatever metaphor, choose your metaphor. We're hanging by a thread, now the thread is broken. And that is what the overwhelming takeaway is just, a sense of fear and a rage, actually, that, now all of this progress is going to be rolled back. And I want to be really clear here that there are all these fake Republican calls for collegiality and honoring the memory of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Those will be forgotten so quickly. You just watch. In a couple of days, in a week, there's going to be Twitter wars going on. There's going to be accusations going back and forth of bad faith. They're going to be both sidesing this all over the place. They're going to be talking about how, it's different now because the same party controls the White House and the Senate, and they are just going to just run and steamroll this thing through. They've already talked about, Trump's already said that he wants the nomination announced before the first debate. So this is... this is a nightmare. This is actually a nightmare. And there's a lot of people who are kind of a little bit complacent about this. It's like, we can just expand the court and add more judges and, that's going to be fine. it's not fine. Okay. This is a huge deal because you think that there's been pushback on other things. If Democrats try to expand the court unilaterally, that's going to be, it's going to create a firestorm, even worse than what's going on right now. So I do want to say, I think there is some hope that, the replacement for Ruth Bader Ginsburg will not be confirmed because we've got Maine Senator Susan Collins, who has already said she's not going to participate in a vote. Lisa Murkowski has said fair is fair. She's not going to participate. Lindsey Graham initially said, and he said, you can hold these words against me, and he said that he didn't think it was right to confirm a judge so close to the election. And now he's turned around and he's going to do it because Lindsey Graham is a fucking jellyfish. He has no spine whatsoever.
None.
I mean, he's got an inflatable spine,
Yeah, exactly. Unbelievable, that fucking guy. He is just, and he has debased himself in a way that I think few other senators have. I mean, they all have, don't get me wrong. They all have on the right. But Lindsey Graham in particular, he's going out there and playing golf with the guy, right? He is, and right after he, and during the primaries, he called the guy a clown. He called him just unfit. I mean, just on and on and on about how terrible he would be for Washington. And as soon as the man became president, he just I mean, it's astonishing the lack of principle.
He's got stains around his mouth, man. This guy is just from kissing ass. And there's a Lincoln Project ad actually showing what he was saying during the primaries about Trump, and it's like it's the best ad against Trump ever because it's got Lindsey Graham just roasting him. But it's just I mean, this is unbelievable. Then you got Chuck Grassley, who says that he's going to follow something like the Biden rule. But I got to say that the pressure on these guys from all of their donors and funding groups is going to be fucking enormous. Any one of them. I mean, it would be a miracle if any one of those guys actually, or women, even because Collins is so famous for getting our hopes up that she's going to do the right thing. And then it's like, in the end, she's like, oh no, I'm going to follow the party line. She did it on impeachment. She's done it on healthcare. She's done it on so many other things. She is a spineless traitor like the rest of them. And there's tons of these shadowy Christian Republican dark money groups, such as the Judicial Crisis Network, the Freedom and Opportunity Fund, the Donors Trust, which is a Koch brothers front group, the BH Fund, and many others who are pushing really hard behind the scenes. I mean, right now, I don't think there's ever been a more electrifying moment for Christian fundamentalists and theocrats.
Oh my God, they're going to be fired up.
Salivating. They are salivating.
Fired up. They can see Roe v. Wade. They can see Gilead, right? They can see Gilead on the horizon, and that is what they want. And I think it's really interesting too. And I think this is sort of flies under the radar a little bit. The thing about John Roberts is a fascinating character in general. But one thing and he's conservative as hell. He is now the ideological center of the court, which is batshit, but he is. And so what's really interesting, I read this article about it today. I think it was Vox article. Vox really has some really good reporting, by the way. They really do. They do a great job. They really they go really in depth on some issues that that some other areas, some other outlets don't.
Conservatives hate it. They just hate it.
They hate it. They hate it. They hate it. Well, we hate truth. They hate truth. So and they hate scrutiny. They hate accountability. They hate scrutiny. That's why the media is the enemy of the people, right? Because the media forces accountability, and that's the last thing the modern conservative movement wants. So in this Fox article, and this is, I think, one of the more terrifying elements of this. Set aside abortion, which is terrifying.
Let's explain. Can we stop for a second and explain Gilead? I mean, there's we know because we watched The Handmaid's Tale, but basically what happens in The Handmaid's Tale which is a story by Margaret Atwood, which was written back in the 80s, and it's been incredibly prophetic. And what happens in this show is that America gets taken over, and the first thing that happens is that there is a feminist sort of icon who turns into a Christian radical and starts speaking to women and speaking on campuses. And it's very, very similar actually to what has been happening, or what was happening a few years ago on campuses, where students were getting people banned from campuses and getting them thrown off, and there was this whole free speech debate and everything. So this woman who was this theocrat, and she was somebody who was to the right of Ann Coulter or Sarah Palin. I mean, she was really hardcore, but she basically helped engineer a fascist takeover of the government. And one of the first things that happened is that women were no longer allowed to spend money. Their credit cards were shut off, their bank accounts were closed, and women were essentially relegated to the status of slaves. And so the show progresses to see what happens there with the underground. And, not only were they slaves, but they were sex slaves. And if you were either a sex slave, or you were working in the camps, or you were part of the underclass in some other way. They had the Marthas, who were servants, domestic servants, and it was a really a society that was for women what the 19th what prior to the 19th century American society was for Black people, because Black people were also sex slaves and subject to all of those sorts of ignominies.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. And I think you did a great job describing it. I frankly, and full disclosure, I never finished watching the show because it made me like ill to watch.
It's terrifying.
So,
it's horribly terrifying.
I got through, Lindsay and I started watching, Lindsay did watch the whole show. But we watched, I think, 2 seasons of it. And I was just like, this isn't entertaining for me. This is awful. Like,
it's
this is
too close to home.
It's too close to home. And I kept saying, like, this is the world that Pence wants. This is the world that people like Pence want, right? A place where men and women that were like, even the sex act there was nothing passionate about it. There was no love involved in it. It was and then just the abuse of women as slaves and as second-class citizens doesn't even begin to describe it. It was much more than that.
You lose your rights. Once you don't, if you can't go to a court and file a complaint that someone raped you or violated your human rights in some other way, then you're a slave.
Exactly.
That's
exactly.
It.
And if you can't, and if you can't deal with things, if you don't have the power to leave your situation, then you are effectively a slave, which is why it's the abortion debate, and why, and you mentioned this, I think, last time we talked, I can't remember what we were talking about, but you were talking about universal basic income, and why that is such an important liberation element for women to be able to say, like, you know what, I can just leave here and live on my own. I don't need your money.
Couple of things there, and that has to do both with normal relationships, normal marriages and relationships, where part of the intimidation for women in normal relationships is that if the husband is making the bulk of the money, or if the woman is just a housewife, then I don't mean to disparage women who work in the home, because that work is valuable too. But in terms of the economy, it's not valued in the same way. So What happens to women who are in the home and they've been there for a long time, they're constantly in fear that if they leave, they will be destitute. So the lack of a social safety net becomes a huge factor in abuse of women. And it goes double also for sex work, because women who are sex workers, you say, oh, well, they can consent, they're choosing it. And a lot of liberals do feel, and I agree with them, that sex work should be allowed and it should be consensual. But the problem with it is that when you have so much inequality in society, is the woman ever really truly consenting? If her option is to live on the street, eat out of garbage cans, or do sex work, is that truly consent? So
exactly.
UBI empowers women in a huge way. And this is the reason, with Republicans, it's not about the money. I mean, we saw the Republicans voted for these stimulus funds. They released, $3 trillion. A lot of it went to corporations, but a lot of it went to the American people. And so if they could do that now, why can't they do that under normal circumstances?
Sure.
Why can't we set the tax rates in such a way that we can have that sort of assistance to people under normal circumstances? And the reason why? Hierarchy.
And we always come back to this, because that's what it always is. And I think about this all the time. I know you do too. And I've thought about this long and hard over many, many years. And I hear arguments of people saying, take conservatism seriously. Conservatism has good ideas, and think about the value that conservatism brings. And look, I mean, I think that they're to be as nuanced about this as possible, because I think nuance is important. There's value in things that they say they care about, things like personal responsibility, things like what's the word I'm looking for? personal responsibility, personal growth, taking care of oneself. I think all these things are important. I think there's value in our traditions, right? If they're assuming that they're don't hurt other people. There's value in those things. But again, none of that stuff. But let me finish. None of that stuff. None of that stuff is particularly conservative, though, right? Those are just good ideas in terms of being a human being. But what in the end, what conservative always comes down to, when you really, really boil it down to, is always someone with power trying to defend that power and against people who want to share it with them. It is always that, and that comes down to hierarchy.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, people can be assholes. We know that. And I think that any situation where if you provide for someone, if you give them a place to live, if you feed them and house them, they could slack off and do nothing and not contribute to society. They could also, use that time to, do all the things that Republicans accuse them of doing: take drugs, foment revolution, all these kinds of
revolution.
Yeah, I mean, if you're not working, you have lots of time on your hands to cause trouble, right? So these are the things Republicans say. But what I say in return to them is that, a lot more people will use that time constructively, and they will work on themselves. They'll go back to school. They might even take, even if they're getting a basic income, they take a job so they can have more money. They would, make art or music and enrich our culture. They could volunteer. They could teach children. They can, take the time to go back to school and learn psychotherapy or any
podcast.
Do a podcast. Yeah. Whatever it is that you want to do, there are many, many constructive things that don't involve compensated labor. And so I think that they use this fear of people becoming ne'er-do-wells to block any sort of help. But what it's really about, they're lying. They're lying about that. That's not their concern. Their concern is that it will equalize society, and they will no longer have the underclass. They will no longer be able to shit on women and people of color. And they will no longer be able to, because it's also a matter of negotiation, right? Because if you are wanting somebody to work for you, if you're a corporation, and say the basic income is equivalent to minimum wage now, you're going to have to offer them something more, like $15 an hour if you want them to come to work for you. Otherwise, they'll just sit home and collect the minimum wage. So this is why the devil is in the details of these programs. If you're going to go for something like that.
Yeah, I think that's right. The universal basic, and I want to go back to what you were talking about in terms of this idea that there are going to be a bunch of people now. If you give people, say, $15 an hour, whatever that comes out to over a course of a year, and everybody just gets that, right? Regardless of how much money you make, how little money you make, everybody just gets it, right? Mm-hmm. And that is the idea of UBI, universal basic income, ladies and gentlemen, and non-binary people out there. So, and I think that's really important. So, but what people don't want to be idle, really, right? And look, let me start this way. There's going to be some people that really will just sit around and do drugs all day.
We have to tolerate that.
And we have to tolerate that. Mm-hmm. And it's the same thing. In terms of like our, in terms of government. There's always going to be some level of corruption. We can't. Mm-hmm. We're human beings. This is a problem with human beings, right? Mm-hmm. This is just a problem. You can create incentive structures, and we should. There should be risks and rewards there should be benefits and burdens for various behavior that helps sort of funnel people's behavior in the way we want them to funnel it. Like stop signs and seat belts, right? Laws, right? Yeah. This sort of thing controls people's behavior. That is good. But at the same time, most people aren't going to run stop signs and stoplights if the law doesn't force them to, right? If the law doesn't force people to stop at stoplights, most people are still going to stop at stoplights because they don't want to die. And it's the same thing with in terms of UBI. I think an analogy can be made here. It's like, look, yes, of course, some people are going to take advantage, but most people aren't. Most people are going to want to do what they want to do, and they're going to be able to be productive and contribute to society in a way that they are best able to contribute to society, not in a way that some capitalist forces them into some box that they have to do, that they have to and be miserable for their whole lives.
And we can't even, here's the thing, like you and I are having this discussion, a lot of other people are too, Andrew Yang, and a lot of people are seriously, and serious economists too, are having this conversation about UBI, but none of that will matter if we get a right-wing ideologue on the court. And that is why we have to talk about this. And we also have to talk about what the Department of Justice is doing, because all of this really, if we want to have a better society, we cannot have a corrupt government. We have to have accountability first and foremost in the government. We're talking about, citizens. You're worried about somebody sitting on the couch. Well, what about the people who work for the public, who are on the government payroll, who are corrupt and who are basically, funneling money to their cronies and who are corrupting the law in every way? And so you've got, William Barr as Exhibit A. William Barr is the most corrupt attorney general I think we've ever had in the United States. Just like he is the polar opposite of someone like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who is driven by ethics. He is an ethical monster, and the reason he's an ethical monster isn't just because he's not like a gangster. Okay, he is a theocrat, and that is our primary focus on this show is to really expose, because I don't think people understand really how bad theocracy is and how much William Barr's Catholicism has to do, and his twisted idea and concept of how government should be. And the way that the government should be, according to William Barr, is that it should be based on loyalty and loyalty to God over the Constitution, and loyalty to Catholic dogma. That is what he's trying to make into the law of the land. And so you get him saying these just outrageous things. I mean, for example, he compared the lockdown orders that were issued by states to slavery, to actual slavery.
It's just so fucking offensive. It's just so deeply, deeply offensive.
On two ways. Of course, it's an offense to the memory of slaves and the people who actually endured that, and the people who are still suffering from the effects of that. Okay, and furthermore, what he's really upset about is that middle class and rich white Americans were affected by this thing, right? And so it's a slap on science and public health. Like, instead of just going, okay, yes, this is obviously, we're not trying to keep people in their houses for no reason. We're trying to keep them there so that they can be alive. It's just like, I mean, you literally have to talk to these people like little children but the worst part about it is they already know. This is the bottomless pit of bad faith that you always talk about.
Yep.
And so, I mean, look, he's calling it like it's house arrest. Other than slavery, which was a different kind of restraint, this is the greatest intrusion on civil liberties in American history. I mean, did he forget about the fucking concentration camps we run for Japanese and the ones that we're running right now, and the hysterectomies?
Like, literally in the news as we speak. I mean, what about Jim Crow laws? I mean, what about the black codes? What about the 13th Amendment? I mean, come on. I mean, it's astonishing. And like you say, it comes from this place of these people believe that Judeo-Christian civilization is under attack. So they but what they really mean by that, because first of all, it isn't. But what they really mean by that is that the hierarchy in which Christian men run the entire show is under attack. And in that sense, they're absolutely right.
They're right.
It is under attack. And that attack started, I mean, it started basically at the beginning of the country, right? In various ways, and accelerated with modernity and progress.
The founders, if you believe their rhetoric, they said all men are created equal. Well, we have to modernize that phrase. It's all people are created equal. Mm-hmm. And because at the time they just, the women didn't have suffrage, so they didn't think that anything of it. But, if we can't fixate on the fact that they were talking about men there, because what they really meant, it's clear they were using men in the sense of mankind.
Exactly.
And so, all of us are created equal. And that's what they said. That is what the Constitution is based on. And, they don't.
That is inconsistent with theocracy, right? That is inconsistent with Barr. It's inconsistent with Pence. It's insignificant. It's inconsistent with this entire administration. The entire administration is based on this concept of, like you say, loyalty and this idea of hierarchy. I mean, that is the whole thing. And so they abhor. And so when you have Mitch McConnell come out with his shit statement talking about oh yeah, well, Ginsburg was this, and she was an amazing jurist, and blah blah blah. Like, I mean,
He's talking out his
bottomless
ass.
pit of bad faith. I mean, the bad faith is astonishing. It really, really is, and it would be astonishing, frankly, if it wasn't so normalized. And I find particular this argument that is coming out of the GOP now, which I wonder if they had this argument in the drawer just in case Ginsburg died, because they could their argument, right? Their argument suddenly is like, oh no. The last time when we denied it, which was 9 months out, when we denied Obama his appointment, right? That was different than this time because the Senate was held by the Republicans, and
right.
and so that is now the argument. And again, what a bad faith argument. It is an obvious, just like it is. And this, you know what this reminds me of, Sean? And I was talking, you know what? I was going to talk about the Voting Rights Act before, and John Roberts, because John Roberts has a sordid history with the Voting Rights Act. I read this morning. He hates the Voting Rights Act, and the main thing he hated about it, I think, was Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. I think is the part that makes it such that if a plaintiff who is suing to say, like, look, I'm not. This law violates my right to vote. He or she has to prove that the person who the organization, the politicians, whatever, that created the law did so specifically with racial intent, right? And so that is the argument that it guts the law, right?
It's a bad faith argument.
It's a bad faith argument
because what you're concerned with is outcomes, right? You're not concerned with.
And that's the difference. And that's what I'm getting at here, is that Republicans like to hang their hat on technicalities and say, like, it's this law is facially neutral. It doesn't directly target people of color or young people, but they know that its effect is to disenfranchise people of color. And so, again, a bad faith argument, and this is the entire philosophy of, on the right, but particular John Roberts, and that's why this court becoming that conservative will give Roberts the majority, the sort of veto-proof majority. I'm using that term loosely on the court, to be able to truly eliminate whatever little shreds are left in the Voting Rights Act, to really get rid of those. He is, from the beginning of his career, when he was Rehnquist's clerk during when Rehnquist in the 80s, and he had an axe to grind about the Voting Rights Act since then. Yeah.
Well, and so in order to really understand how dangerous this all is, you got to understand the 1-2 punch of having a right-wing SCOTUS and somebody like Barr in the Justice Department. Because let me just read to you what Barr said. Okay, he is essentially, he's going at this is him still going after the states, and he says most of the governors do what bureaucrats always do, which is that they defy common sense. Well, who's common sense? Right? I mean, they're following science as far as we know. And so Barr said they treat free citizens as babies that can't take responsibility for themselves and others. And this is such bullshit, because we know that, I mean, are you treating citizens like babies when you put up a stoplight?
Exactly. So fucking stupid.
We know that systems have to, in order to function, systems have to have, gates and restrictions, and, you have to do this if you want to do that. And, so the idea here is that, you have to wear a mask if you want to go out in public. It's your choice. You don't have to go out in public, but you could wear a mask. And so, he's basically, what he's really doing is treating citizens like babies. Like they should have the right to go out and stamp their feet and walk into a Costco without a mask, and the Costco shouldn't be able to kick them out. Things like that. This is the type of ludicrous nonsense that Barr is pushing. And then what? He has the audacity to compare his own prosecutors in his own Justice Department to, wait for it, preschoolers.
Unbelievable.
Okay? Unbelievable. And why would he do that? Okay, so a top prosecutor in the probe into the origins of the investigation of President Donald Trump and Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election has quit, reportedly in part due to fears that political concerns were behind pressure to produce a report before the probe's work was completed. So you've got Bill Barr. Basically, he wants to produce a political document to impact the election, to swing the election, to somehow allege that, President Obama and somehow peripherally Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton and all the boogeymen
of course.
Went after Donald Trump using the Justice Department under the Obama administration, to unfairly investigate. They're trying to turn this into a criminal investigation, okay? And they want to release this thing in October, all right? And so prosecutors are, some of the top prosecutors in the country, and that was Nora Danahy. She's the top aide to U.S. Attorney John Durham. She resigned, and let's see. She said nothing about political pressure, but the newspaper also reported that colleagues said Danahy is not a supporter of President Donald Trump and has been concerned in recent weeks by what she believed was pressure from Attorney General William Barr, who appointed Durham to produce results before the election. They said
these are just examples too, Sean, of the gaslighting, right? Like, so not even gaslighting. That's not really true. Projection, right? It's these officials, someone like Barr, going and saying, pushing for this investigation about the boogeymen, right? I'm sure it probably involves people with pink pussy hats and and Antifa and I don't know what other boogeyman we can pull out of a hat. Right, that they love on the right, but
anybody who's against Trump, anybody who's against Trump for any reason,
for any reason at all. And illegals, right? I did air quotes, by the way, out there because I would never say that word seriously. Anyone who is a sort of a boogeyman on the right. So they go ahead and say oh yeah, these people are doing this investigation and they're trying to take down Donald Trump and they're doing illegal, and they say this, and it's exactly what Barr is doing, right? So
he's doing it himself.
He's literally doing it himself, right? And same thing with Trump goes out there during the rallies and says the only way that the Democrats can win is if the election is rigged. And it's no.
He's rigging it.
The only way that you can win is if the Electoral College is essentially a rig, right? Because it's essentially a rig. Because really what it is that we know it just says we don't care what the people say. We don't care what a Democratic vote says. We're going to do X. So
we're going to use every technicality to stop people from voting, to amp up our voters and suppress your voters.
Exactly.
And it's being done, also against the backdrop of, an investigation the Justice Department is doing into Hunter Biden, right?
Which is what? And talk about waste of taxpayer resources. I mean, what? I mean, this fake ass investigation. These investigations cost millions of dollars, right? I mean, every day people have to go to work. They get paid. They're not doing this for free, right? They could be doing other things that are useful, but instead you have a bunch of prosecutors running around chasing geese.
Yeah, so it's honestly, this is this is the state of the Justice Department. It's a complete corrupt mess. It's getting worse, and against this backdrop, we're contemplating seating another member of this Republican mafia on the highest court. It's a 5-alarm fire, man. I just don't even know what to say.
I know what you mean, and what I've heard on Facebook, and I think we should definitely put this in the show notes, and that is call people, right? We can talk here, and we should talk here, and we can talk on Facebook, and we should talk on Facebook. Sort of spread the ideas to get people worked up about what is going on here and understand the stakes. But what we can do also as voters and as constituents is call the hell out of these people, right? Call the hell out of these senators. And that kind of pressure really does work, right? And we saw this during the fight for the Affordable Care Act early in 17. We saw that and it worked, right? They feel the heat. They really do feel the heat. And it's a lot harder for those senators to ignore. It's a lot easier for them to ignore the will of the people if they don't hear from you, right? If they think if they're just in the Washington echo chamber,
they're running for office right now, and
exactly
in a lot of cases, they're running behind. So it's very likely, it's very possible, in fact, that we may get some defections, and that's what we're hoping, and
that's all we can hope for.
We're not praying because praying doesn't do anything. Maybe this doesn't either, but
this definitely doesn't do anything. We're both crossing our fingers, by the way, for the listeners out there. We're doing our fingers crossed, and we all know that kind of shit is bullshit, right? That is what we're. Sean and I are atheists. You don't have to be an atheist out there to listen to this show, but if you really believe that crossing your finger works, well, I've got a bridge over the East River, I'll
Get
give
out.
you a really good price. I'll give you a really good price. Really good price. Just for you. Just for you. Just for you. Really good price.
Well, we got to take a look at the short list of nominees. I think you and I pretty much know who it's going to be here, and I think it's going to be Amy Coney Barrett. That's the one that all the theocrats are looking at and just salivating over. You know, and she is a member of a very conservative Catholic sect. You know, coinkydink here. We got the Catholics coming in to take over the government. You know, it's called People of Praise, and her writing shows that her faith has played a significant role in how she sees the law. In 1998, she co-authored a law article arguing that Catholic judges should be able to recuse themselves from cases that would force them to act immorally. Okay, well, so again, they're putting their personal morals, they're injecting that into their job. They're being paid by the government to do a job which has to do with civil society, not with you know, their religion. They really have religious freedom, but they should not be bringing that into their position. And these guys are expressly trying to change the long trend and the long precedent that people should not be bringing their personal, you know, a judge is specifically prohibited from doing that.
Exactly. And I think this is a really great point to sort of hammer a great opportunity here for us to hammer home what we talk about when we talk about radical secularism, when we talk about secularism in general. And that is, right, it is not that we think that that judge shouldn't have her religious beliefs, right? It's not that I don't think that you should have your religious beliefs. I don't care if Mike Pence has his religious beliefs. I think they're batshit crazy. And I do think that religious beliefs in general are pretty fucking nuts. But look, you can do whatever the hell you want. I'm also
it's America.
It's America. I'm a left libertarian in that way, right? In that in the sense that, like, look, do whatever the hell you want, but keep it the fuck out of our government. Because once it gets into the government, then now what you're doing is you're legislating your faith into my life. And that is one of the hugest problems, right, with the right as it exists right now. And what ended up happening, really, I think, Sean, and maybe you'd be able to comment on this too, is like a long time ago, the business right made a deal with the devil, and they said, look, we can when we lost a lot of people early on, and after the Democrats and Republicans flipped during the 60s, right? The Republicans basically were scrambling to find people to fill those gaps, right? And so what they did was like, hey, well, the business people, the hardcore business people said, like, look, we got the evangelicals out here and we got the racists. Let's form a coalition based on that. And that's essentially and they've been riding that tiger now for over almost a century. And the tiger's now the tiger's taken over, right? The tiger's taken over.
Hey, Barry Goldwater warned them about this. He's like, if this ever happens, holy shit. I don't have the quote memorized, but that's basically what he said.
Yeah, that's more or less what he said. Holy shit, dude.
and what happened is that, in I think it was 1953 was the first national prayer breakfast with the family, and Eisenhower, that's when Under God was added to the to the Pledge of Allegiance. And that is when, essentially the express religious influence started coming into the government. And it really was a shameless power grab, in the sense that what religion was saying is we're no longer about being meek and kind and loving and all the things that Jesus talked about. We are for power, and we are going to use our power we're going to get everybody involved. We're going to get Democrats, we're going to get Republicans, and in this case, it was a Republican, Eisenhower, who started that prayer breakfast. But every Democratic president since then has gone to every prayer breakfast. Yep. So it's like this is a power organization that has infiltrated. And I don't want to both sides this, okay, by the way, because Democrats are much, much better on secularism. I mean, much better. It's what's happened though is
even as they're religious, right?
Even the religious ones,
explicitly religious, right? So I mean, people not only they say that they're religious, but they say it's a huge part of their lives, right? Biden says that he is a practicing Catholic. It's a huge, important thing to him, but he understands that doesn't mean he gets to force it on everybody else.
Well, and that's the thing. Hillary Clinton also is religious, and she talks about it a lot in her book. I mean, her faith is important to her, but you don't ever see her proposing theocratic legislation.
Exactly.
Why is that?
Exactly.
So you've got a situation where I think Democrats participate in the National Prayer Breakfast because it's been inculcated into our process of governing. You have to be there. It's become an institution, really.
Sure.
And so but what is scary, and what you start understanding when you start understanding the connection of Russia and the money with Trump and everything else like that, is that the family has made major inroads into Russia. And that was in the documentary as well. So you start seeing that, all of these incredibly corrupt dictators around the world are latching on to the Christianity in the same way that the Republicans latched onto it in the United States. So, so Amy Coney Barrett is a part of that. She is a part of that whole I don't even know what to call it, heavy hand of theocracy coming down. And so, and you could really look at it in her judicial philosophy, which is, there's 7 statements that I'm going to go through here I think are very important for people to understand. And by the way, even if she's not the choice, the other choices will have similar writings because they have been vetted by these Christian organizations and by the Federalist Society to have these specific qualifications, which have to do with textualism, which have to do with the theocratic beliefs, where they have actually stated expressly, which is her first thing, which is a means to an end. A legal career is but a means to an end, and that end is building the kingdom of God.
That is, oh my God, that's terrifying. Oh my God, that's terrifying.
That's the first thing that she said. Now, the second quote is, judges cannot, nor should they try to align our legal system with the church's moral teachings whenever the two diverge. That's a dodge that I don't believe that for a second.
Yeah, exactly.
But she says then, they should, however, conform their own behavior to the church's standards. So what does that mean? What does that even mean?
I think that's a really vague, probably deliberately vague question. When she gets in front of the Senate, this would be really interesting. I think that one of the things that I think that the Democrats can do is basically drag out those hearings as long as possible, and I think that you'll probably see that. So I'm really interested to hear. This only happened yesterday, so the news and reporting on this isn't extensive in terms of what the Democrats are doing to defend, right? Because they're going to fight this as hard as they can fight it. One thing they can do is say that they're going to pack the court on the back end, right?
Yeah,
maybe we could explain what packing the court is. I think
court packing is that we can add, if we control the Senate and if we control the presidency, we can add judges to the Supreme Court. So we could appoint liberal judges to counterbalance the conservatives. So instead of 9 justices, there would be 11 or 13 or whatever.
Exactly. And it's important to note that the number of justices is not in the Constitution, right? That's a matter of statutory law. So that can be changed by the Senate. That can be changed, right? That can be changed in the Senate, in the judicial, in the sort of legislative process. And so that is a theoretically an avenue, but really it's just a negotiating tactic, really. That's just a card to have in your pocket. I don't think anybody's seriously going to do that just because of the backlash would be so strong, I think.
It'd be a firestorm. Well, what's happening is that the Republicans, they see this. This is their shot. This is their shot to finally, to basically break the rule of law in the United States and to institute their authority and hierarchy-based system that is answerable to God, as which is a dodge. We've gotten into that before.
Yes.
If you say you speak for God, well, who's checking?
Yeah, exactly. Right. And that's the thing, because God's, as we know, is not going to show up and say anything. So basically you just get to call the shots, right? What does that even mean?
When somebody says God, when it has to do with politics, they mean me, they mean dictatorship.
Exactly. And when people say, and similarly, interesting side point, because people say this all the time, when the people say the American people want, they said they really mean my coalition wants. That's what they're really saying.
It's the same thing. So let me get back to Amy Coney Barrett. And her next statement was that she did not think it was ever appropriate for a judge to apply their personal convictions, whether it derives from faith or personal conviction. So again, she's contradicted herself right there. How do you on the one time say that the end of your judicial service is building the kingdom of God, and yet it's not appropriate for you to ever apply your personal convictions? She's contradicted herself hopelessly, and there's no resolving that contradiction.
No, and the only reason why she says that is because she knows she has to, right? Because, right, so what she's done there is on the front end, she said she's satisfied the Christian right. I'm sure she's a very ambitious person. You don't get to where she is unless you are a very ambitious person. She knows that to get to where she wants to, and she's charted her path via Christianity, which I'm sure she believes wholeheartedly, which is why it's so terrifying. And so, but she also realizes that one day, if she wants to be on the Supreme Court or be a circuit court judge, she would have to answer questions. And so answering questions means she has to sound like she's partial, right? And especially because she's a woman, she knows she's probably going to get heavy scrutiny. Unlike a guy like Kavanaugh, who rapes people and then just jumps on the court, right? There's your male privilege for you.
She's working at both ends of this. She's trying to, because she knows she has to convince the theocrats that she's going to do their bidding. She's not going to pull a Gorsuch, and change, because Gorsuch, handed down a decision supporting transgender rights, and they are furious. They are furious with him for that, and so they don't want to repeat that mistake.
It's like, what did we buy? What did we buy? I want my money back. What did I buy? Right?
Exactly. So she did say that she believes that in Roe v. Wade, she has not made a specific statement about Roe v. Wade, but she did say that she believes that the life of a child, which includes a fetus, is on a similar level as the life of the mother. So that right there, that's where that's the loophole. The whole thing is going to get overturned on that. If you're going to be protecting the life of the child, and it's such a dishonest. I'm not going to even get into that, but so dishonest.
We could do a whole show on that.
Yeah.
We should probably do that with a woman on the show, though.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Preferably one who's had an abortion who can talk to us about how they felt about it.
Yeah, because that's I can't even imagine going through that. But anyway, that's a whole other thing. We can talk about that another time.
Yeah, and okay, so her next point is that she believes in the Constitution over precedent, which I think is the basic textualist, originalist interpretation. And she says, I tend to agree with those who say that a justice's duty is to the Constitution and that it is thus more legitimate for her to enforce her best understanding of the Constitution rather than a precedent she thinks clearly is in conflict with it. Wow.
Wow. Well, then that just opens the floodgates then, right? That just opens the floodgates, because if that, then anything, right? Because that means basically if precedent goes out the window, which is so wild because precedent and stare decisis is the basis of our entire legal system. So to be able to say oh yeah, you know what, we're just going to throw that out the window because my belief on it is X, Y, and Z, I think is madness. And it also goes back to that same argument, I think that we hear a lot out of the right, which is this, because the textual argument is they like the textual argument because it bolsters their position, right? That's why they like the textual argument, because they don't like things to change. And so the Constitution was written at a time when, right, 3/5 of a black person was counted in the census, right? So this is the era. And so that is, if you are a conservative who doesn't like change, then that is a win for you to be but I want to also just touch a little bit on the before we transition, and I'm looking at my watch now, but transition to the climate change discussion. But I think that one of the things that you argued actually in the piece that we wrote, everybody should check out that piece, by the way, that you and I wrote, is that, they are off the party of the free market. They're the party of the free market until fossil fuels become, but it is no longer competitive in the market. Then they have no problem with doling out subsidies, propping it up, right? So again, bad faith. That's why I don't buy this textualist argument. I think that's bullshit. I think it's about hierarchy, and it's about maintaining that hierarchy.
It absolutely is. And, going back to Steven Pinker again, he talks about how language is how we think. The words we use, the language we use is how we think. And language, the meanings of words has changed in the last couple of hundred years since the Constitution was written. So a lot of judges are going to say, well, plainly, this is what this word means. But the originalists will go back and say, oh, no, actually, that word meant something else back then. And so what they're doing is essentially they're not only rolling back the changes in society, but they're also trying to roll back the changes in the language whereby we would understand something like privacy, for example, to extend to a woman's uterus. That's a basic privacy right. And they might say, well, no, that was only meant to cover somebody's papers and effects or whatever. And so it's just, the originalist textualist thing it's a lie. It's a dodge.
Absolutely. It's bad faith. It's bad faith. And it's always just masquerading the point. And we hit on this over and over again. And we will keep hitting on this because I think this is the most critical thing for people who care about progress and who care about actual sort of human flourishing and outcomes, right? For people is to realize that this is not a group of people who is interested in your happiness or my happiness or anyone's happiness or anyone's rights. This is not a group of people who is arguing in good faith. You can't walk around and say like, oh, by the way, right, like the Second Amendment's an obvious example. Like what a militia meant in during 1800 is a lot different than what a militia means today, right? These sort of concepts evolve, and so. Because society evolves. But if you are in the business of not wanting society to evolve because historically you have had power in that society, well, then of course you want to do an originalist interpretation. Of course, that bolsters your position. Or if you are the person who's reaping the money the way the market is set up right now, well, of course you like free markets. But as soon as the free market is against you, now you hate free markets. Now you're like, oh no, let's get subsidies, let's prop up big oil. Like, come on. Bad fucking faith, man. A bottomless fucking pit of bad fucking faith.
Yeah, and so her last quote has to do with, and this is really scary because this is directly related to hierarchy and authoritarianism, which is she is against Miranda rights. She thinks that she is against Miranda rights, if you can believe it. So she thinks that people who confess or say things, even if they weren't Mirandized when they were arrested, that evidence should be able to be used by the state. So she's taking a heavy-handed position in favor of cops, in favor of law enforcement, in favor of, just changing all the rules. I mean, because so many people have been, abused by the cops and lied to by cops and not read their rights. And, those cases are thrown out. And it's a good thing because I'm not in favor of letting people go who are guilty. But if there was a confession that was coerced or that it was obtained under false pretenses, that just encourages police corruption. So again, she's her stated record is that she is for increasing this kind of law enforcement corruption. So
that is so awful. And I took criminal procedure, at least at Georgetown, it's called criminal procedure, is basically you go through the Fourth Amendment and what is a reasonable search and seizure, right? And there's a whole Supreme Court jurisprudence about this, including stuff written by Justice Ginsburg, the late Justice Ginsburg. It's called the fruit of the poisonous tree doctrine, which is basically like if there is an arrest that is the result ultimately with the ultimate result of an illegal sort of action on the part of the police, then that sort of invalidates the validity that arrest becomes invalid. And so, that sounds like, oh, that sounds great. But the problem, of course, is that there's also in that same jurisprudence, the police have no obligation to tell you the truth. They have to Mirandize you. But that, the Miranda, I remember reading Miranda versus Arizona, and it's just really like powerful to literally, like in law school, right? And literally just read that, because those were just written into the opinion. Like, right? Like you have the right to remain silent. You have that was like written in the opinion, and the cops just took that out of the opinion and put it into their cards that they read. And so it's really powerful to sort of just read that. But most of Supreme Court jurisprudence is not nice to suspects. It really isn't. Like police officers have an unbelievable amount of latitude, and that's setting aside, and that's just on the legal side, setting aside the soft power that they have when the credibility that they just get by showing up in the courtroom, and the only reason why that's sort of that tide has been slowed is because of everyone has cameras now. So you can't, it's harder to falsify a report if it's all on tape. So anyway, that's terrifying that that's where she is on this, because that is authoritarian as fuck.
It is, and so it's just like, and I think we can understand that that this is connected. You would think that, oh well, something involving police procedure is not connected to her theocratic bullshit. I mean, they are connected. This is about wanting to just increase state power, increase law enforcement power, and that is of course the goal of the Trump administration, the goal of Republicans generally. That's why the cops support Trump. I mean, they love this. They're tired of having to follow these pesky rules, and
absolutely
they just want to throw these people in, lock them up, throw away the key. So anyway, I'll wrap that up because I know we gotta move on. But the other two shortlisters are Senator Tom Cotton and Ted Cruz. And
come on, like those guys. I mean, hacks. Political hacks.
They're not they're not known for their legal scholarship, and furthermore, this makes Amy Coney Barrett sound positively, the civil libertarian, because Tom Cotton actually wrote a horrific editorial in the New York Times that the military should be used to suppress civilian dissent. So
that's right.
You have somebody like that. I mean, talk about Miranda. He wants to throw out the whole criminal code and just arrest people.
Exactly, and just arrest people. And that is going to make him a really hard target in terms of if he were nominated, right? Because that would be thrown right in his face, and it would be all over the news. The pressure would be really, really hard on him. And so in some ways, I think we ought to be happy that the New York Times published it, or whoever published it, the Washington Post. I think it was the Times.
New York Times. It was Times.
Times published it.
And then they later on apologized for publishing it.
Yeah. I think they fired the guy who the chief, the station
who vetted
chief, or whatever
it.
it was. Yeah, who vetted it. They were like, this guy got the axe. So, but in some ways, I mean, it's nice that sort of opinion got out, just so we know who this guy is.
Well, and that's not even the worst of it. I mean, he voted against the Violence Against Women Act, which, by the way, I got another axe to grind right here, right now about that. Is that we should not have a Violence Against Women Act. Okay, we should have a Violence by Men Act.
Mm-hmm. That's
words
really
matter.
Interesting. Words do matter, right? That's really important because it's a difference between the active voice and the passive voice, and that really makes a huge difference there, right? Because violence against women almost makes women or the victim.
It makes them sound complicit or something.
Exactly.
You're not even talking.
She should have worn something different, right?
Who's doing this?
She shouldn't have worn that dress.
Are aliens attacking women? I mean, who's doing this?
Right?
It's like
exactly. It's always men, and
it's
usually, and there's also this sort of trope or this myth on the right that they like to say, like, as if it's like these shadowy men in the wood, it's like jumping out of like cars and out of alleyways and raping women. Like, no, it's not that. It's the people that they're close to, right?
People
it's their
they
family
know,
members,
people they
it's
live
their
with,
boyfriends, it's their husbands. That's who it is, and that's who they don't want to say in the Men's Violence Against Women's Act, right?
Yeah.
The husband and boyfriends. That's what it should be. The husband and boyfriends violence against women.
Yes,
that's what it should be.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine how Republicans would freak the fuck out if you proposed a husbands and boyfriends act, violence act?
Exactly. Like, yeah, I mean, that would be. It would just be laughed right out of the committee. Like they would just know. Like they're like, wait, how would I possibly rape my wife then? How could I possibly sexually abuse my family if I did that? So I've been watching with my wife. I've been watching this show. It's on Netflix. It's excellent. It's called Space Force. And
really?
Oh my God, it is so excellent. Steve Carell. It is really they just barely changed the names of Pelosi, Schumer, all the characters, right?
Gotta watch
it. They do it so well, Sean. They nail it. It is so good. But the bottom line is that a couple of the lines that he says was like, Steve Carell is like kind of like he is in The Office, but he's a little bit, he has redeeming qualities. He's a complicated character. But the bottom line is, a couple of things that he says that like really stuck out to me. He said one thing, he's like, well, if you can't rape your wife, then who can you rape? So, and he was making a joke, right?
We shouldn't be laughing at that.
Yeah, we shouldn't be laughing at that. It's because it's not funny.
It's not funny at all.
But it's a political show, and it absolutely is attacking Republicans and conservatives. It is making fun of the Trump administration. So the point of him saying that is precisely because that is the kind of thing that comes out of the Trump administration. And he said, and he also says he's walking through NASA, and or through Space Force actually, because they've created a Space Force, just like he's a joint chief of staff essentially. And he's walking through there, and he's like, oh no, don't talk to the scientists, they're too committed to reason, and it's like he literally says that, and like he's making these jokes, right? Because like and because they're so salient today, because it's exactly what we're dealing with. And it's definitely black humor, but it's totally worth a watch. Go for it. Definitely worth a watch. Lindsay and I have been like cracking up every Sunday watching this.
I think we need something like that, because the only way to get rid of this is, the anxiety, the constant anxiety.
So
is just
true.
Gallows humor and other comic relief like that.
Exactly.
All right. So anyway, our last guy on the list, there's a list of 20. We'll post it in the show notes. But Ted Cruz is another shortlister, and again, he's got the same problems as Tom Cotton.
Exactly.
Same problem.
I mean, just a piece of garbage, and a guy who's willing to sell it. Right. This is a guy. Can you imagine being his wife? It's like, this is the guy who like made the president made fun of your wife and called her ugly or whatever he did, and
horse face or whatever.
Horse face, and then he just bends over and just takes it like no problem. He's like, yeah, that's perfectly fine. I don't care.
They all got the rings around their mouth.
I'll just kiss your ass, no problem, no problem. It's just so despicable. Him, Lindsey Graham, all these characters, Unreal.
Yeah, no, it's unreal. Well, and so we have to talk about the stakes for this, because it's obviously horrible for women, but it's horrible for all of us because we have climate change. Climate change
exactly.
is again pushed off the front page, except for we had the fires on there, but again, they try to pretend that the fires have nothing to do with climate change, nothing to do with it.
And what's crazy is it's becoming, what's gratifying is that for people like you and me, is that, it is gratifying to finally see people pay attention. It takes San Francisco looking like literally like a picture from Mars for people to say like, oh, wait a second, this is real. Like this is actually happening. And I think because the problem with climate change is like smoking cigarettes, right? It is so analogous because it's not like doing heroin, right? So like when you smoke a cigarette, but heroin and nicotine are equally addictive. There's really no real difference between those two in terms of their ability to addict a human being. But of course, the effects of smoking are far long off, and people start smoking at age 16. I got this right here. Yeah, exactly. People start smoking at age 16, 17, and back then, when you're 16 and 17, of course, you don't think anything could possibly hurt you, and so you smoke, and then next thing you know, you're 50 or 60 or 70, and you have emphysema. But again, it's a long way off, and we human beings are evolutionarily designed to discount future harms, and it is how our brains work, unfortunately. And climate change works the exact same way. It is not easy to fully grasp the concept of climate change. First of all, brains that were just not meant to grasp concepts that were that big in general, our brains just didn't develop in that environment, right? And then we developed in places where we saw that we lived with the same 150 people in the same like 10-mile radius for our entire life, right? So it's like, go ahead.
It's bird in the hand versus bird in the bush. It's always that. And that goes way back in our evolution. It's the same kind of
true.
Caveman math or cavewoman math, where it's like 3 bears went in the cave, 2 come out, not safe to go in cave. This is the same kind of calculation that people make when they say, oh, I can have this now, or I can have this in 10 years. And now is much better. Now as you get to eat, you get to live, you get to continue. So evolutionarily, it's, now is what we want, prosperity now. And so what's happened is they've presented this false choice. This false choice that they have played expertly on that false choice that people are making. What they don't realize is that, for a very, very small additional, 2% of world GDP, we could solve this problem forever. Or we could have. I don't know if we can solve it now. It's literally gotten to the point where we've waited so long, and these delay tactics have been so bad that we may actually have passed a tipping point. We won't know. We won't know until the future whether that's true. But one thing is for sure, if we had taken 2% of global GDP and put it towards solving climate change, starting in the 70s or 80s, we'd be done.
Exactly, we'd be fine. And you mentioned this in the article. I ended up cutting it, but I thought it was a really, really good point. And so it's worth pointing out here. And is that if we could just pay the fossil fuel industry to go away. And they would cost so much for us to do that. but it would be worth it. And it would be cheaper. It would be cheaper than what we are going to face as a civilization in the future. It would have been the same thing with the Trump administration. If we had just paid them, when Trump came down that fucking golden escalator, if we had just said, look, we'll just pay you to go away, that would have been cheaper, and it would have cost a lot of money, but it would have been cheaper.
Well, we talked about this, the pandemic, having impacts of $8 trillion or whatever it is. And so, we could have literally written a check from the U.S. Treasury right now to $100 billion and say, you guys leave the country, get the fuck out of here, never come back. And we would have been $7.9 trillion ahead.
Exactly.
And
we would have been one.
We're in a similar situation with climate change. If we just pay these fossil, it says, get on a fucking spaceship to Mars and never come back, and we'll pay you, multi-trillions of dollars to do that. The world would be way ahead of the game. But it's like you'll find out in this article. I mean, and I'm not going to go through it point by point because we're getting pretty close to the end. But I just want to encourage everybody to go read it, because you got to understand that Vladimir Putin is pretty much the fossil fuel mafia personified, and his little boy Trump over here is just a bit player as far as he's concerned. He's personally worth about $1 trillion, and it puts Jeff Bezos to shame.
Exactly.
I mean, and not only is he worth $1 trillion, but he's got a whole country and a nuclear arsenal of nuclear weapons behind him.
Exactly.
So the guy is literally, he's the king of the world right now. There's no question about it.
He really, really is. He really is. And I think that's super important, because I think that a lot of we talk about on this show, and you and I talk about online during the week and to each other, and we commiserate about things like patriarchy and racism and feudalism and all the things that the GOP has evolved into being all about. But you can't talk about any of this without talking about the fossil fuel mafia, because that is behind the entire thing, right? And I always try and stay away from doing this thing where there's a shadowy room, some smoke-filled room with
not like that.
Sitting there like this. It's not like that. We're not going to do what the GOP does and just set up straw men and boogeymen to get upset about, and then get upset and then get pissed off about that. We're talking about a network, an industry of people who are just, power hungry, yes, but also just people who want to get rich, and people who don't really fully understand the impact of what they're doing, or if they do, they don't care. But the bottom line is, you got folks like this around the globe, from Saudi Arabia, the United States in particular, Saudi Arabia, United States, and Russia. And that trifecta of petroleum-driven economies are, in a lot of ways, this entire shebang that we're dealing with right now. And we talk about this in the article. The entire shebang that we're dealing with right now with the Trump administration and certainly the environment is all about that. And particularly Putin, right? Particularly Putin, because Putin is his entire, and we talk about this in the article as well, we won't go through it point by point here, but his entire economy is entirely premised on oil. It will not, the Soviet Union, wow, Freudian slip there. Russia will cease to be a relevant factor without oil flowing through the world. Cease to become a relevant factor.
The first thing as you were talking, I was thinking about is that this is all happening out in the open. There's no secret. I mean, there's no. So you can trace the transactions. Where the money's flowing, who's paying who, what. I mean, there is dark money for sure, and there's a whole underground money system of tax havens and all that kind of stuff that Russia takes advantage of. Okay, but this stuff is largely out in the open, and everybody can see it. And if you think about it, what the wealthy have always had, their job has always been, in a democracy, you've got to convince, 50% plus one person to vote for the wealthy. And how do you do that? It's Christianity, it's men's rights, it's pleasing the majority enough to make them vote for you to rip them off and rob them blind. And that's what the Republicans have become expert at. And then they're starting to realize, as the demographic transition took place, as women become more empowered, as civil rights happened, that they started losing elections. And so what are they going to do about it? Disenfranchisement. All of these things have to do with maintaining this position of the wealthy on top of the heap and being able to continue to mine fossil fuels and destroy the world. And so it's no accident that the right has suddenly become just more and more reactionary, because they're appealing as they cut off, as they disenfranchise voters, they no longer have to be accountable to those voters, and so they're only accountable to the ones that they still allow to vote, which are the white men.
Exactly.
And so
the people who finance them, right? The people who finance them, which are exactly those people, like
there's never wealthy. Enough. There's never enough of the wealthy. You got to get Joe Schmo to back you.
So true. And you do that via wedge issues, right? Abortion or racism. And I'm reading that Du Bois book, the history of Reconstruction in the United States.
Yes.
And he really I've been listening to it a lot, and it really just gets into this issue in terms. And also the other book is, maybe we'll put this in the show notes too, the White Trash book.
White Trash, yeah.
It really gets at the alliance that the wealthy capitalists from the North and the South made with white men, and said, like, look, if you work for us, we'll take care of you, and don't worry, you'll never be black. Right. You will always have somebody below you. You will never be the bottom of the totem pole. And that is the unholy alliance. And here we are. I mean, and so why, when anyone who tries to threaten that alliance, who tries to undo that balance, they lose their shit. And that's why it seems so irrational to us on the other side of it, why they get so upset. But when you put it in the context of hierarchy, it all makes sense. You're trying to take away the one chip that the poor white man has. You're trying to take away that one chip. That's the only thing he's got, right?
Yeah.
He's oppressed. He's just oppressed as you are, but he just gets to feel better about it.
So they just appeal to that over and over again.
And over.
They needle him, they poke him and needle him and prod him and go, oh my God, these women are taking over. These blacks are taking over. You're losing your rights. America is not going to be America. And what they mean by that is white people aren't going to be in charge anymore. Exactly. That is the entire dog foghorn of the Trump administration, and why he's going after the 1619 Project, why he loves the Confederate statues, all of these symbols he's going after. These are symbols. It's like,
of white supremacy.
Symbols of white. I'll give you your symbols of white supremacy if you let me rob you blind.
Exactly. And that's the deal. That's the deal. And that's the deal that we as progressives here are trying to undo, that we are trying to demand our seat at the table. And this Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the fight that we're going to see evolve over the next 2 months, we're going to see this in real time, in real action. We're going to watch this unfold against the backdrop of the actual presidential election. It's going to be remarkable. It's going to be bloody. And so, look, I mean, I think for everyone out there too, and I know we're at the end of time, we're really at the end of time here, but I just want to, like, everyone out there who's listening to this, right? Like, this really is a 5-alarm fire, right? This is, everyone needs to get out of their seat and get involved. And there's many, many ways that we can do that, right? Like I mentioned earlier, we can call people, right? We can vote. We can make sure that our friends vote. And we should speak out online, and we could speak out in person, and we should do this sort of thing. And we have to, I think, also, and listen to what we're talking about here, because if you understand the nature of the problem, right? When you understand, and that's what we're talking about here on the Radical Secular, right? Understanding the nature of the beast, and stop trying to think about the opposition that we're facing in terms as if we're fighting against ourselves. We're not fighting against people that are thinking the same way we are. No. And what we're trying to talk about here on the Radical Secular is how that the worldview that we're fighting against is fact proof. It is reason proof. It is compassion proof. That is not. It just is.
Look at what you're dealing with here. You're dealing with, everybody wants to make this about a liberal justice versus a conservative justice and blah, blah, blah. Like this is some procedural thing. No, this is about trillions of dollars, pure and simple. Trillions of dollars are at stake. And if we get a champion of the people, if we get Joe Biden elected, and if we get a Supreme Court justice who is a champion of the people in the mold of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, it is going to cost these people trillions of dollars over the next decades as they lose their fossil fuel, as the fossil fuel mafia gets put out of business. And that's really what this is about. It's not about abortion. That's a side effect, okay?
Exactly.
It's an important one for women and for men, it's critical. But that is not what we're talking about here. We're talking about cold, hard cash and the heavy boot of the fossil fuel mafia coming down and taking over our country at the behest of Vladimir Putin. And
absolutely. And we talk about this in the article, and you should definitely please do read it. It's not that long of a read, but I think it's really important because we talk about the authoritarianism that we're seeing rise around the world and in the United States is directly linked to this, right? Because democracies, we won't vote for oil. We as a planet want to move on, right? There is money to be made. There's prosperity to be had. There is a clean environment to be had. That's what we want. But that's why authoritarianism is the tool of the fossil fuel mafia, because then people can't vote. And so we don't have a voice anymore. And so that is why this is so important and so critical. This election is so critical. This seat is so critical. And I guess I'll shut up now.
Yeah, well, it's really, I mean, we will do a whole show on this, and we need to, because, this was just sort of tacked on the end, but it really is, it's an important part of what, what the stakes are. And so I think we've said it all. So once again, I want to remind you to make sure and subscribe to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're watching us on YouTube, be sure and hit that red subscribe button, and be sure to give us a 5-star rating. Do it. Tell your friends and family about our show. Word of mouth does matter. And check out the Just Words Fallacy Medium publication. The link is in the show notes. And look, thanks everybody for being here. And remember, wherever you are, you too can be radically secular.